Good morning, boys and girls. Happy Wildcat Wednesday. Miss Garcia here to do another online lesson for you, with you, actually. So today we're on lessons 4 and 5 of our SWAN unit. So we're going to start up at the top with our objective as usual. So today's objective is almost identical to yesterday's objective, just with one slight difference. So I'll read it to you and then I'm going to have you repeat it back to me, all right? It says, today we'll equally partition rectangles into equal shares. So yesterday it was, today we'll equally partition rectangles into equal shares using rows and columns. So we just took away that little part where it specified partitioning the rectangles into rows and columns. So your turn to repeat after me. Are you ready? All right. Today we'll equally partition rectangles, your turn, into equal shares. Your turn. Okay, nice job. So we have the same vocabulary that we had yesterday, so we're just going to do a quick review of it. So we have the word rectangle. Here I have 3 rectangles. These 2 look the same, and I'll come back to those in a moment. But I just wanted to focus in, zoom in on these 2 first ones because when we were doing our shape unit, we talked about how shapes can actually be positioned any way that we want them to. And it doesn't matter the orientation of the shape, meaning the positioning of the shape, it still would be considered a rectangle, okay? Partition is just a fancy math word that has that chunk part in it, so we have that underlined because it gives us a clue about what the word partition means. So the word partition just means to divide an object into smaller shares, which is another fancy math word, and all that word means is parts, okay? So partitioning just means dividing an object into smaller shares or smaller parts. And then yesterday we talked about rows and columns, and even though it's not part of our objective today, I'm still going to go over these words again. So we talked about rows yesterday, and we talked about how rows are kind of like eyebrows. So eyebrows grow side to side, right? On my face, I took that lovely selfie and included it in yesterday's lesson, and you guys examined my eyebrows. Maybe you even examined your own, and you noticed that your eyebrows grow side to side, horizontally, not vertically. Wouldn't that be funny? So rows go from side to side, left to right. And then we talked about columns. So we have the, does anyone remember what this structure is called? Starts with a Parthenon. You got it. So we talked about this structure yesterday, this ancient Greek structure called the Parthenon, and we talked about how the Parthenon has columns holding the bottom, connecting the bottom to the top. So columns connect from top to bottom. Okay, they go up and down, or they're vertical. So rows are horizontal, like your eyebrows, and columns are vertical, like a column on the Parthenon. All right, so I'm going to hop back up here. Because we have a couple of new vocabulary words that I just wanted to go over with you. So I'm going to take just green, and I'm actually going to partition this first rectangle into 2 parts. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw a line down the middle. Now I created 2 columns, 1 column and 2 columns. So this shape, this rectangle, has been partitioned into halves, okay? And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shade in half of it. So now, to represent this fraction, I write that there are 2 parts altogether. You remember this from last week. The denominator is 2, that bottom number. And then the top number, the numerator, is how many shares are shaded in. So 1 of the 2 shares are shaded in, so we would write 1 out of 2. We also could say that this is 1/2, and that there are 2 halves. So kind of a funny spelling, okay, but that is how you would spell the word halves. Now, I'm going to hop to the next rectangle here, and I'm actually going to divide this rectangle into thirds. So I'm going to take my marker and just create 3 rows this time. Instead of columns, I did rows, and they're almost equal shares. They're not exactly, all right, but they're pretty close. And then I'm going to shade in, I'm going to go with 2 shares this time. So there are 3 shares altogether, so my denominator is 3, and then I have 2 shares shaded in, so we would say that this is 2/3 shaded. And we would call this type of partitioning thirds, right? And then I'm going to come to this last rectangle, and I am going to partition it into fourths. So I start by making 2 rows, and then I'm going to go ahead and also do 2 columns. So now I have 4 equal shares, almost equal. So if there are 4 parts altogether, my denominator is 4. And then I'm actually just going to shade in 1 of the 4 shares. So this fraction would be 1 out of 4 shares is shaded. And we would call this, fourths. This shape has been divided or partitioned into fourths. So these are the vocabulary words that you're going to need to know for today's lesson, all right? All right, so now that I've gone over today's objective and I've gone over our vocabulary for today, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to model 2 problems for you before you get started with your independent practice work. So the directions at the top say partition rectangles into equal shares. Now, I do want to remember this specific part of the direction, that it says divide the rectangles into equal shares. Now, it doesn't specifically say to use rows and columns, so I don't have to use rows and columns, but actually for this first one, I am going to, all right? So the first problem says divide rectangles into fourths. Now, today, I actually have a ruler, so if you have a ruler at home and you'd like to use a ruler, you definitely can. Just a tool to make my life a little easier, make it easier to make those straight lines. So right now I created 2 rows, so from left to right, 2 rows, but I need 4 parts, so I'm going to go ahead and divide that into 2 parts, and then I'm going to divide this one into 2 parts as well. So then I end up with 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as you're looking at this, you're probably noticing, Miss Garcia, those aren't exactly equal shares. And you're right. They're not, because I didn't measure where each line should go, where I should create each row, but that's okay. All right, so I do have, however, 1, 2, 3, 4 parts, 4 shares that are generally equal. So it says, how many equal shares are there? Well, that's easy. There's 4 of them. Okay. All right, so next I'm going to model the second problem. Now, the second problem says divide the rectangle into halves. And remember, our objective today did say to partition rectangles into equal shares, but it didn't specifically tell me to do that using rows and columns. So I'm going to show you how to partition this particular rectangle without rows and columns. So all I need is 2 halves. So I'm going to take my ruler and I am going to stick them in the corners, these 2 corners, top left and bottom right. Then I'm going to draw a line down. Okay, remember, if you have a ruler, you are more than welcome to use it today. And then, ta-da! Do I actually have 2 equal shares? Definitely, right? So I have 1 equal share, and I have 2 equal shares. If I were to cut these 2 triangles out and place them side by side, you would actually see that they're identical. So they're definitely equal shares, and there's definitely halves. So the next part says, how many equal parts are there? Well, that's easy. There are 2 equal parts. And I just partitioned this rectangle diagonally. I could also have partitioned it the other way, diagonally. Okay, so I could have drawn my line from the bottom left corner to the top right corner. I could have created a row and partitioned it from left to right. I could also have partitioned it in half by creating 2 columns, so drawing a line from the top to the bottom. So there's a few different options when you're dividing rectangles into halves. It doesn't always have to be by making rows and columns. Certainly is a great way to do that, but also you can use diagonal lines. Your choice. All right, so now that I've gone over today's objective, I've reviewed our important vocabulary, and I've modeled 2 problems for you. It's your turn to get started with your independent practice work. So you're going to head over to Google Classroom, and by now I'm assuming you have watched the video. So once you're all set with the video, you're going to move on, and you have 2 options. So option 1 is you can print off the worksheets and do those worksheets using a pencil and paper. If you don't have a printer but you really want to do it by hand, you can always copy the worksheets down on a piece of paper and do the worksheet that way. If you don't want to print the worksheet and you also don't want to copy it by hand, you can head over to Seesaw, and so option 2 is the Seesaw option. Now, for a presentation today, you're going to submit a video or an audio recording explaining problems 1 and 2 from your final check. So I will be looking for those videos or for those audio recordings today in Seesaw. So good luck, have fun, and I'll see your final checks later. Bye!